Well, I had originally planned to just review Battlefield 1, but time got the better of me, so this commentary about the campaign is gonna have to do so I can at least express some of my opinions on this game without detracting resources from other projects I'm working on. I may or may not do one of these for the multiplayer down the road, but for now, here's my filtered slash unfiltered thoughts on the single player of Battlefield 1. All in all, I have to say I enjoyed Battlefield 1 overall, but I couldn't get over how poorly done the single player is for this game. I'd rather replay Battlefield 4's lame campaign another 2 times than do a third playthrough of this underwhelming mess of a story. In my opinion, this honestly has to be the worst campaign to come from the series yet. Now, while I know that Battlefield has never been about the single player experience, at least Battlefield Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3 had solid campaigns with decent storytelling and semi-likable characters. Then to boot, even Battlefield 4 had a somewhat cohesive story with a few strong set pieces. Which is more than I can say for Battlefield 1, sadly, because Battlefield 1 made almost every mistake in the book making this joke of a story. Let's start with the length and story structure. Battlefield 1 is around a 4-hour journey on easy and normal mode and a 5-hour slog on hard mode, which is rather standard for AAA military FPS games at this point. But what makes Battlefield 1 worse than most other military FPSs is that 4 to 5 hours is spread across 5 mini-stories if you count the prologue. The major issue that this causes that any depth or good writing the game could have had beforehand goes straight out the window. This is due to the game having to constantly reset itself story-wise, so every hour the game runs it has to create a new set of characters, stories, enemies, and environments. To accommodate this format, the game goes for really generic plot lines and characters that are very predictable and one-dimensional. So as a result, it's really hard to care about what's happening when you can predict almost everything that's going to happen and you've spent very little time with the people involved. Here's an example of the point I'm making. This is the entire plot line of the runner's storyline. Spoilers ahead! This guy is kind of a jerk to this kid that he's forced to work with. Then he starts to like this kid and they become more like friends as they fight the Ottomans in Gallipoli. And at the end, one of them dies to save the other. See, it's extremely predictable, and because this whole arc starts up and wraps up so quickly, you most likely won't care at the end when one of them dies. In DICE's attempt to tell a story about multiple fronts of the First World War, they didn't end up telling any meaningful stories. Now, I want to make it clear that this game doesn't fail because it's a group of stories. It fails because the game doesn't want to commit to making each story its own thing. So in the end, the single player spreads itself so thin to the point of where it lacks any real identity and feels at best. I feel that DICE should have just made one 4 to 5 hour campaign instead of 5 30-minute to 1 hour campaigns. That would have at least led to there being some depth to the story and more focus on the characters than what was given to us here. So, to keep adding to the dumpster fire that is the Battlefield 1 campaign, I'd have to point out that the story never takes any risks as well. I just feel that DICE really missed out on an opportunity to show some of the darker realities of World War I, such as the Armenian genocide and chemical warfare, instead of just passing over them entirely. Hell, I would have even settled to have had one campaign where you play as the Central Powers on the losing end, just to show that there's two sides of every conflict. But to move things along, I suppose that I should at least touch base on the gameplay. Now, generally speaking, I really don't have any issues with the basic gameplay of the single player. The level layout works most of the time, the shooting mechanics are as smooth as previous games in the series, it mostly just works. But it still has its share of smaller issues. I'd say that the biggest of those smaller problems is the yet again half-cooked stealth system and the extremely bad difficulty scaling. Starting with the stealth, it's very simply structured. You move around quietly and slowly take down enemies one by one with a melee weapon or suppressed firearm. You can also tag enemies and throw a bullet casing to distract a foe from his normal patrol with the intended goal of getting through an area without alerting the enemy to your presence and completing your objectives without wasting most of your supplies. You know, basic stealth game stuff. Now I have to say that this is better than Battlefield 4's detection stealth system because you can actually get through a good bit of areas quietly in the campaign now, and there's actually a fair bit of gameplay designed around it. Where it hits a hurdle is that the game kind of punishes you for indulging stealth, and there really isn't much incentive to be stealthy. The main issue is that the suppressed versions of guns for some reason can't share ammo with the unsuppressed version of the same gun, immediately putting you at a disadvantage by taking the quiet path. And with how dumb the AI is in this game, it's honestly easier just to run in guns a-blazing, rather than moving slowly and quietly even on hard mode. Which brings me to my second problem with the gameplay: the difficulty scaling sucks. The only things that change as you go higher up in the difficulty modes is that you take less hits to kill and the enemy damage ratios go up. So if you're already decent at the game, you will blow through it on hard mode just like you would on easy mode. It just gets slightly more annoying. Hell, the only campaign that was any harder for me on hard mode was the airplane campaign because I really suck at flying in Battlefield. So, to wrap everything up, I just found the Battlefield 1 campaign to be a throwaway mess that tells a really shallow and unfocused story that has bland characters, doesn't take any risks, and has a couple noteworthy gameplay issues. Which, in my opinion, has resulted in the worst campaign that I've played in the franchise. But I want to make it clear that I don't hate Battlefield 1. In all reality, I like the multiplayer a lot, and I'm glad that DICE was even willing to make a World War I game at all. I just found the single player to be pretty bad and not worth the time, let alone making up 50% of the day one content of Battlefield 1. And I would have preferred that DICE had just put more time and energy into the multiplayer instead of making this joke of a single player at all. But that's just my 2 cents, and you're welcome to disagree with it.